Welcome to another episode of 30 Minutes in the New Testament. 30 Minutes in the New Testament is a 1517 podcast network podcast. You can go to 1517.org/podcast and check out all the other podcasts that are living over there. While you're over there, make sure you check out everything else that 1517 is doing. Academies, articles, events, videos, all the stuff. Check it all out. And while you're checking it out, go to the right-hand corner, hit the donate link, that support link, so that you can become a, supporter of not just this show, but everything else that 1517 is doing. But if this is a show you like, then, just know that what you're doing is making this show exist. And so you can go become a reoccurring supporter. You can do a one-time thing. You can, you could do stocks. You could leave us your entire estate. If you really wanted to do that, we'd be happy to take it off your hands and put it to good use. So all this stuff, thank you so much to those of you who do that. Also, if you're one of those pastors that are listening to this, because I know we got pastors listening to this, this is some exegetical work. They're listening to it. Your church could be a church partner. All you got to do is get a hold of Eric Sorensen. That's it. Eric, how are they going to get a hold of you so that your church can be signed up to be a church partner? You can be featured on the 1517 site. It's a great thing, and you're helping support what we're doing.
Indeed. You can just reach out to me at Eric, ERICK, at 1517.org. All you have to do is say, tell me about church partnership, and I'll reach out back to you.
Yeah, you will. He'll get right back. He'll get right on it. So
right on it.
All right. We have exited the Sermon on the Mount, guys. That was a long journey, a good journey. I enjoyed it, and but we are done with that. Jesus is gonna stop. He's gonna stop saying so much for a minute and start doing some stuff, right? So I know everyone loves some doing, and Jesus is going to do some Jesus things that we are in Matthew chapter 8. Eric, this starts off with when he came down from the mountain. So this is just right after he is done saying all these words in the Sermon on the Mount, busting them all up with the law, talking about the kingdom of God. Now he's coming down the mountain, and what's going to happen here?
Yeah, so the crowds are following him. That's what it says immediately after we're told he came down from the mountain. And just to go back to what we talked about as we concluded the Sermon on the Mount, these crowds are sort of shell-shocked. We're told that they were astonished at his teaching because they recognized he was one that taught as one who had authority and not as their scribes, which is basically just another way of saying they were a bit panic-stricken, because they recognized that God was speaking to them. They recognized that there was something different about him than any other teacher they'd come across. And he's going to reveal even more of his divine nature as we dive into Matthew chapter 8. It says in verse 2, "And behold, a leper came to him and knelt before him, saying, 'Lord, if you will, you can make me clean.' And Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, 'I will. Be clean.' And immediately his leprosy was cleansed." Now, I'll stop here because I love a detail about this story that actually comes up often throughout the ministry of Jesus. And that is, Jesus can heal this man by the power of his word alone. We know that God does this all throughout the Old Testament. I mean, he can speak things into existence, including the very universe that we are seated upon right now. And yet, when Jesus is walking in the flesh, and a leper comes up to him, an untouchable, literally an untouchable, someone that you were not allowed to unless you wanted to be declared unclean and unfit to be a part of temple worship, also just a huge pariah. But Jesus does not shrink back. And he doesn't merely speak the words of healing, but he actually touches the man. And this is this must have been profoundly moving to the man and to the crowds that were watching this. Like, what is he doing? He's actually touching this leper? Doesn't he know he could get leprosy? But of course, this is the one that absorbs our infirmities and our evils and our diseases on our behalf. And so there is no fear had by him.
Well, the part of what you're saying is illustrated in the very next story, which we'll get to, where Jesus obviously can just say that something should happen and it happens. You're going to see him do that.
Yep.
Yeah, but with the leper, though, you're talking about somebody who, who knows how long this person has been touched by anybody, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're a leper, no one's touching you. And this is the great contrast between Jesus and your current faith healers. Now, I need to see a faith healer put his bare hand on a leper and then I'll start paying attention.
I'll be open.
Stuff
That's
that
funny.
I'm going to need you to put up or shut up. All right. Like, so Jesus, he ain't afraid of no leprosy. This is not concerning to him. One of the things I love about this is, yes, that Jesus goes and literally touches the unclean, right? Which is great. That there's like this huge gasp, because even if you like kind of have this inkling, you're like, man, this guy teaches with authority and this guy's different. You see someone reach out their hand and touch a leper, you're like, okay, like we're on like there's a whole other level, right?
He's getting into trouble too, or at least, I mean, people are speaking about him, and about plots, I'm sure, even at this point, because he's breaking the law. I mean, he's reaching out, and he's being connected physically to the unclean, and that's a no-no. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure with the Pharisees and the scribes and the Sadducees and the teachers of the law that are in the crowd, they're not just gasping in disbelief that he's putting himself at risk. They're gasping that he's breaking the law.
Yeah.
Well, Jesus is going to have to get quarantined here, right? And they're going to be like, we need to see what becomes of this. Make sure that you're not going to start spreading this contagion everywhere. One of the things I love about this text is what the leper says. First of all, he says, Lord, right?
Yeah.
So this is the first thing that he does. So this leper is identifying Jesus as Lord. So that's the first thing that happens. He says, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. And I love that Jesus stretched out his hand and he touches him first and then says, oh, I will. Like, oh, I will it. Like, this is exact. Like, you have come to the right place, right? Yeah. Because that's exactly what I would like to do.
Yeah, it's a pretty amazing illustration of the way that Jesus moves throughout all of his ministry, by touching those who are the untouchable and by speaking to those who are the outcast and those who were deemed unspeakable. And yet you come in verse 4 to this interesting little tidbit that happens sometimes throughout Jesus' ministry, and it's probably worthy of us discussing, like, what exactly is going on here. It says in verse 4, and Jesus said to him, see that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer the gift that Moses commanded for a proof to them. Now, before we go any further, it's probably important to note that the other gospel accounts actually tell us that this leper did not obey Jesus' command to not say anything to anybody. As a matter of fact, he just couldn't contain himself and started blabbing.
Why does he keep doing this? I mean, it's almost like just a running joke with him. It's like we can describe a bunch of reasons to it
because no one seems to obey his command.
Theologians
to keep quiet.
have come up with through the years and assign great meaning to it. And there probably is
a messianic secret.
Yeah, but I mean, at some point, it's just got to get a little funny. Like, don't tell anybody.
Yeah,
I just think I'm going to say it anyway.
It's more proof that even when Jesus tells you to do something or not to do it, you still won't.
Yeah.
I mean, this guy just got healed by Jesus, and he's like, don't tell anyone. He's like, I'm not going to be able to listen to that.
This guy starts out by saying, Kyrios, Kyrios, Lord, Lord, falling on his knees, acknowledging the divinity of the Christ. And the Christ then after he heals him, turns and says, no, don't say anything. And of course, like the law hits you in the face from the mouth of the person that you just confessed was Lord. And you go out and do it anyway. That's why I say to Jesus, this is just kind of like let's see.
Well, and what Jesus is commanding him to do is in accord with the law. I mean, if he had kept his mouth shut and he had gone and shown himself to the priest and shown that he was cleansed, then he would be initiated back into temple fellowship or synagogue fellowship or whatnot. Yeah, he would have been exactly right. I mean, he would have been integrated back into society. And so Jesus is really, I think, doing this guy a favor too. He's trying to, help him get integrated back into functioning life. But also, Lenski, R.C.H. Lenski, the New Testament scholar, he posits that maybe the reason that Jesus does this is because he knows when people go and start talking about this, that it limits where he can go in his ministry without being harmed before the time that he's meant to be harmed.
I think my conjecture I don't know is about as good as that conjecture. I mean,
exactly. I mean, the reality is, like, no one exactly knows why this happens. So whether it's just a running joke or because he just doesn't want to be boxed in. Whatever.
I actually think yours makes more sense even than either one of mine or Lenski's, in that if he goes and talks to people, he's going to be interacting with them in a way that the law says that he shouldn't, and is going to draw scrutiny before he's cleared and begins the process of being, because it's one thing, because he'll be integrated back into the religious sort of ceremonies at this point. He can be, at least, but for faithful Jews, that controls society too. So when we say that, we think, oh, well, they're going to let him go to church now. And it's more than that. Like, if the religious leaders of your day, if you're a faithful Jew, tell you that this guy is out, he's out. Like, and he's out not just of church and what goes on at church.
Well, it means he can go to the market himself.
Right. And
so it means he can work again. I mean, like yeah.
Strategically,
let me pause a different.
It's better. Here it comes.
I actually think it's a little bit different. Okay, so what he tells him to do is like, hey, don't go around just telling every Tom, Dick, and Harry about what I did for you. I want you to make a beeline for the chief priest and go over to the temple, and then you show them the proof. I don't want them to hear a rumor that I healed a leper. I want those dudes to take a good hard look at you and like know that you got healed, because I actually think that Jesus is not on a mission here to protect himself from the Pharisees and like until an appointed time. He's actually saying, listen, I don't want them to hear just the commotion of the crowds. I want to really, really have them know so that they can have that conversation. Go tell them that the Jesus of Nazareth healed you, and go ahead and offer the proof. Like, strip down naked for him. Let him examine you. And I actually think that Jesus is just interested in like the religious leaders knowing more than he is in like the fame of the people and like drawing more crowds. This is about him actually getting right to them and say, because Jesus is, we're going to see his interactions with the scribes and the Pharisees and stuff, and like he's not a fan.
No.
And like Jesus is not above letting them know that the time is drawing nigh. Right?
Well, and to back up that as a well-functioning theory of understanding why he does this, it would make a whole lot of sense after his Sermon on the Mount if we see it as him being sort of a prosecuting attorney against the scribes and the Pharisees' way of downplaying and minimizing the law of God.
Yeah.
Well,
so this could be seen as like a shot in the bow.
Between the Eric conjecture, the Lenski conjecture, the Scott conjecture, and the Dan conjecture, you probably have a good answer in there somewhere.
That's it. Probably
somewhere. So. Yeah. Okay, I feel safe to move on now to our next miracle. So verse 5, it says, when he had entered Capernaum, a centurion came forward to him. Now, important to point out, centurion, Gentile. This is a Roman soldier. A centurion came forward to him, appealing to him, Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, suffering terribly. And he said to him, I will come and heal him. But the centurion replied, Lord, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof, but only say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I too am a man under authority with soldiers under me. And I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my servant, do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard this, he marveled and said to those who followed him, truly I tell you, with no one in Israel have I found such faith. I tell you, many will come from east and west and recline at table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven, while the sons of the kingdom will be thrown into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And to the centurion Jesus said, go, let it be done for you as you have believed. And the servant was healed at that very moment.
Okay, listen to this. First of all, this guy's faith is out of control. Like this guy's awesome. You need to know that the centurion is awesome, right? But imagine you're in this situation. So like you hear about this guy, you're a Gentile. You have no reason to think that he necessarily at this point that this guy's for you, right? But you're going to go and give it a shot. So you go tell him like, hey, my servant, like who cares? This is your servant, but he cares about this servant. He's suffering greatly. Jesus is like, you know what? I'll come heal your servant. And he's like, no, I can't be having God come under my roof. Just say the word. I understand authority. Like I'm a man under authority. I got people under me. I get it. You just say it and it'll be done. And then Jesus says this thing, and you got to think this guy's like, what? Like he's like, I'll tell you this. I've never seen, by the way, first of all, what an indictment. And all of Israel, I haven't found this much faith anywhere, right? So that's not, I mean, that's
people will come from the east and the west and recline at table.
Yeah,
but the sons of the kingdom will be thrown into outer darkness. I mean, if Jesus wasn't doing a shot in the bow with the first healing, this one is no doubt.
Yeah, yes. And I think that the centurion's got to be going like,
oh man, what did I step in the middle of here?
What is going on? I'm just trying to get my servant healed. I don't know about all that, but yeah, let's do this healing thing. But yeah, like Jesus is, and this is part of the reason why you're saying, like, why does Jesus want the leper to go straight to the Pharisees? I mean, Jesus is leaving the Sermon on the Mount. He's coming down and he's just spitting fire when he's talking, where he's like, I'm going to heal this leper, the unclean. I'm going to touch him. I'm going to tell him to go to the temple and show himself to the Pharisees. Oh, a Gentile, a centurion, an oppressor. This guy's not well liked at all, surely. Yes, I'm going to do this for him. In fact, not only am I going to do this for him, but I'm going to compliment his faith. Not only am I going to compliment his faith, I'm going to diss everyone while doing so and just say, like, this guy's got the most faith of anyone I've seen in Israel. And I'll tell you this faith is indicative of something that's going to happen, which is people from all over the place are going to be hanging out with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, reclining at a table, eating that heavenly meal. But there are some who probably think that they're in that group that are going to be eating that heavenly meal that aren't. They're going to be cast into outer darkness. Like, this is pretty intense stuff for Jesus to come out the gate with.
You know, just to point out a couple things here. Every time I hear this story or something like it, it's interesting that the centurion is not approaching for himself or even for his family. He's approaching for his servant. If you were to translate that accurately in a way that's not offensive to modern readers, you would just say he's coming for his slave. The servant of a centurion was probably acquired by the centurion off on one of his campaigns, you know, when people who lost the battle in that campaign were taken captive. This is how, you know, it's why you wanted to be a Roman centurion, because you could get, and even a Roman soldier at some point, you could get some of the bounty of the war and bring it back and increase your personal riches. And one of the ways this happened was by acquiring slaves. But nonetheless, he says that he's worried about him because he's suffering terribly. And I think that's just so interesting, because we have, in our modern context, we are not able to put, because of sort of the narrative behind our own awful history with slavery, we don't have a mental category for somebody that owns another person and yet is worried that they're suffering and doesn't want them to suffer.
It's just common knowledge how often these slaves would end up being viewed like a member of the family, and their family, you know, that they had themselves.
That's right. Well, it's like when you get things in the New Testament where they talk about, like even the prodigal son. Dan and I were just talking about this ahead of time. You know, that's a parable, but the implication is all over that parable that the father, you know, had responsibility, and this is one of the things I think that the older brother, it's implied he's worried about, had responsibilities for an entire household, and that household is going to, we think of that and we think, okay, he had kids, obviously 2 sons at least, but it goes out from there to servants, to the servants' families, to older, you know, to brothers and sisters, to, you know, the household here is a more sort of encapsulating view than we hold of it today. But he even, and then when he talks about a man under authority and who has authority, he even says that these servants are, and the people, the soldiers that work for me, are some of the people that I can just say a word to and they do my bidding. And so you really do get this thing that he's got legitimate power over these people, and yet he's concerned about them. Mm-hmm. And this too is also the person that then has such faith in Jesus. We have a hard time with that just because of like I said, the narrative over our own cultural past, that this is one and the same person. Now, this doesn't mean the Bible is promoting slavery. You know, the fact that Jesus didn't. Dan and I have done a tough text on this. We absolutely don't think that it does, and that it speaks against it. But it's what Jesus is concerned with here is not sort of the liberation of this servant from his slavery, right? What he's concerned with is the liberation of the centurion from his sin. And as sort of a mechanism of this, he's going to commend his faith and heal his servant.
Yeah, I mean, Scott, part of it is like, I mean, Jesus is basically saying, well, let me tell you, buddy, you got your faith in the right place, and I'm about to show you exactly how right a place that is, right?
Which is how Jesus heals.
In doing so, yes. And in doing so, he also is instructing everyone else around them, like, by the way, this is the place to have your faith.
Yeah.
And incidentally, we should probably point out that we have no idea whether the servant who was suffering actually had any faith in Jesus himself at all.
Correct. I guess that's kind of one of my...
Jesus...
Probably not.
Yeah, probably not. So this is another example in which, and you'll see this all throughout the gospel narratives, where people will come to Jesus on behalf of somebody that they care for or love, and Jesus, in response to their faith, will heal their daughter or friend or servant or whatever it is.
Yeah, that's the guy whose friends lower him through the paralytic through the roof. I mean,
that's right. That's a great one.
Jesus expressly says in the passage that it says
it's
seen
your faith. Yeah, that's right.
He didn't say anything about the guy's faith on the mat. He says he saw their faith and did it.
But most of the detailed accounts of Jesus performing miracles like this are going to start with a narrative about faith, and then move to healing. Now, it's not like a faith healing, right? That's not what he's saying. It's the power of Jesus that's healing every time. But he's using, in a sense, he's using the healing as a proof that he has the authority to forgive the sins on which the faith is based, right? And so it's kind of, it always goes that direction. Like, you have faith in me, that faith being in the right place means that your sins are forgiven. To show you that this is true, I'm going to show you that I have power over this physical calamity going on, and heals.
It's so important to take note of is that the healings are always done as a means to point to why people need Jesus, or a vindication of his word of forgiveness.
Now, Scott, before we move on from this, tell me, how offensive is it when Jesus turns to those who follow him and says, truly I say to you, with no one in Israel have I found such faith. I tell you this, many will come from the east and the west to recline at table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven, while the sons of the kingdom will be thrown into outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Like, how jarring of a statement is this?
It's so jarring that it's absolutely no surprise that they killed him. The only surprise is that it took him 3 years. Like, this is...
Like, I mean, I don't know if people understand how offensive this would be. Like, we hear that and we're like, oh, okay, whatever, Jesus. Like, it's not like that. That's a crazy thing to say.
Well, he's not, I mean, he's doing all sorts of things that could, if the Jews had like full reign over this territory, you know, and the Romans weren't there to sort of impose Roman law over it too. Because if people think about the account of his death, they have to go through the system of Roman law to actually be able to kill him, right? Like, he gets tussled back and forth before the religious tribunals and Pontius Pilate, you know, but it's at the end of the day, the authority of Roman law that makes it so that he can actually be killed without consequence on those who are killing him. If you were to take that out of this, likely even him not correcting the leper when the leper refers to him as Lord would have been enough blasphemy for him to be brought up on blasphemy charges, the penalty of which could be stoning or some sort of death. And then you just double, and he's never really trying to stop them from plotting against him. In fact, he contributes to their desire to plot against them over and over again, because he could think these things, but he says it out loud, you know, and he says it out loud, in which you gotta know is in mixed company. You know, we always think, great crowds followed him. Let me tell you, the only people in these crowds aren't people that love him. There are people in these crowds following him around from place to place trying to get evidence against him they can build up a strong enough case to say that he's a threat to Rome too, so that eventually they can approach the Roman authorities and say, I thought we only worship Caesar. Look at this guy's walking around saying he's king.
Yeah.
Well, part of it too, Scott, is that there's people following him that are just sort of like curious. I mean, he's doing stuff, saying stuff, and they're just kind of like, what's going on with this guy? But you see many examples of this, that Jesus will amass crowds and then do something, and that crowd will thin. Like, no doubt, Jesus turned around and said this, and there were people in that crowd that maybe weren't even there for malicious reasons. There probably were some that were just kind of like curious. He rattles this thing off, and I'm sure a bunch of people were like, "That's too much for me. That's it. I'm out. I'm out. That's it. This just got dangerous."
I say this all the time, especially when we come to the events of Holy Week, is how often Jesus goes out of his way to kind of pick a fight with the religious establishment. He is not shy about this, and he is not shy. I mean, from even the Sermon on the Mount that we just read, I mean, his whole entire ministry is one in which he is upending all of the religious establishment, and he knows what he's doing. He is very well aware of how much this is going to bother them and what this is going to lead to. The least surprised person on the day of his crucifixion was Jesus Christ.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
He knew exactly what was coming.
Yeah.
That's why you send a healed leper straight to the temple, man.
That's
why you do it.
It's worth
I like
noting.
it, Dan. I like it.
We didn't say it either, but the Centurion refers to him as Lord too, the exact same way that the leper, who we assume is Jewish, does too.
So now we get to verse 14, and when Jesus entered Peter's house, he saw his mother-in-law lying sick with a fever. He touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she rose and began to serve him. Now, I just like that order of things, because I think it's just this very mini picture of like kind of what happens when people are absolved or loosened by Jesus, is they all of a sudden find themselves serving him. And usually how is it done? By these sort of very practical means. She's probably making a meal or something, maybe sweep the room up or something.
Do you ever think that though maybe it went down like this? I mean, not that Jesus wasn't going to heal her anyway, because Jesus heals everyone that he comes in contact with that's sick. But they like Jesus has been doing this stuff. They go over to Peter's house, and like Jesus is like, all right, let's get some dinner going, and then Peter's like, we might just have to fend for ourselves. Mother-in-law's sick. And Jesus is like, oh, I got this. Don't worry. Let me just heal her real quick, and we'll get supper get
I'm
going
not going to miss those ribs.
Yeah, you got to have her cooking, man. She's real good.
That's so funny. So just to my point earlier, you have to notice that who lives in Peter's house is part of his household. His mother-in-law. And these are big.
Which, by the way, the norm throughout all of human history until like the last 70 years, and in particular in the West.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I mean, this is just the norm that like families were expected to like, yeah, of course your mother-in-law's going to live with you. Of course you're going to take care of your elderly family members. Like, what? This is a no-brainer. So it says in verse 16, that evening they brought to him many who were oppressed by demons, and he cast out the spirits with a word and healed all who were sick. This was to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah. He took our illnesses and bore our diseases. And of course, that is a reference to Isaiah 53, one of the famous servant songs in Isaiah's prophecy. And this is, again, another instance of Matthew wanting to make sure that even as he is criticizing the Jewish religious establishment, and pretty strongly, Matthew still wants to emphasize, but he is, in fact, the Jewish Messiah.
Yeah, I mean, I also think that this text is important for even people to understand this part of it, where so they bring in all these demon possessed people, and it says he casts all these devils out, and then he heals everyone who's sick, and then Matthew says that this is a fulfillment of what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah. So you have this: he took our illnesses, and then this, and bore our diseases, and this is important because sometimes we think that that Jesus just goes around like healing people and stuff, and like it's all great, and then he's forgiving sins, and that's all wonderful, and then eventually like the bad part comes, and he has to go to the cross, and then then he has to take on the sins of the world there, and that's a bummer. But this is not how this works. The ministry of Jesus is about him undoing things, but literally, like, there's an ontological thing that's happening when Jesus is going around healing. Like, sick, like, it doesn't just like vanish away. That he's taking it
Yeah, he
into
absorbs it.
himself.
So the way
right?
it's translated,
like, he's bearing your diseases.
yeah, the way it's translated is not always great, and I think sometimes they do this just because it'd be long to do it. Otherwise, you'd say a lot. There'd be more words involved. But it kind of sounds like he took them and threw them aside, right? And that's, I think, if you just, especially if you kind of pass over the bore, that's kind of what you get. But when you look at the Greek here, it's very much that he took upon himself, and you could put them together instead of sort of separating them by he took our illnesses and bore our diseases. You could say he took upon himself and carried with him for the rest of his life our illness and diseases. And it really, if you do it something
and
like
this
that,
is why
it takes away like that he's just casting aside. They're coming to him.
This is why it's, when we read the passages about Jesus needing to get a break from the people, because what is he getting from the people all the time?
Bad.
He is bearing sins. And so it makes all the sense in the world. And he's like, I'm just going to have to go talk to my father for a little bit because it's getting, this sin bearing is getting a little tiring.
I love it when he needs a break from the disciples.
Yeah, man.
Like the disciples, he's just like, you guys are just, it's just too much right now. I mean, if you've ever been in a,
but almost every time he tries to get a break from his disciples end up doing something dumb that makes him have to stop his break early.
I mean, if you're a father, you get this one too. I love you guys, but I just need a break for you. Then you leave and you come back and the house is destroyed. And you're like, why did I ever leave?
Yeah, but
I might know what you're talking about there, Scott.
This is like an important point to make about this as you read about Jesus like doing these things. You have to know that this is like the ministry of Jesus is a difficult ministry in that sense. This is not. I mean, there's it's only 3 years long, but he
waits till he's 30 to start it.
He is, yeah, and it's this is a hard thing, right? And it is. I don't think some people are like, ooh, he lived the perfect life, and that was probably the tough part. Nope, I don't think so. Like he's righteous. He's not gonna be going around sinning. But what he is gonna be doing is taking on sin and like taking on disease into himself. And like if you think the cumulative effect of this, because he is fully God, yes, but he is fully man, is not something that is burdensome. Like, I don't know if you've thought real deeply about what that would exactly look like.
Yeah, no, I think it's...
we're out of time. So we're past out of time. That's the way this has been going. That's okay. It's 34 minutes in the New Testament. Or whatever, we changed the name. But
Scott's added a cumulative 4 minutes.
Yeah, that's fine. But next week, Jesus is going to keep doing some stuff, and we got a great passage to start with next episode. So make sure you come back for that. I'll see you guys then.
All right, sounds good.